You've ever drive past a road sign with a really strange name and just think, where on earth did that come from? Well, in South Carolina, those names, they aren't just labels on a map. No, they're more like a living history book, and they're packed with stories of conflict, hope, and, believe it or not, even a few good jokes. So let's dive in and unpack some of them. Okay, first up, a little test for you. Take a look at this name. It's a pretty big street in Charleston, and you see the family name all over the state. How would you say it? Huger. Go on, give it a shot. So, if you said User, hey, that makes perfect sense. It's a totally logical guess. But if you want to sound like you're from around here, you'd say UG. And that right there, that perfectly captures the puzzle of South Carolina's place names. They just don't follow the rules of English you'd expect because, well, a lot of them aren't English at all. Now, we're not just pulling these stories out of thin air. We can dig into all this thanks to an amazing project, a whole series of journals called Names in South Carolina. For decades, the editors just collected the history and the folklore behind thousands of these names. It's an incredible archive of the state's whole linguistic past. So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with that pronunciation puzzle, then we'll dig into stories that come from the land itself. After that, we'll look at how the map was really made of people from all walks of life. And finally, we'll uncover some of the history that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. All right, let's jump into that pronunciation puzzle. Why do names like Hugger or Combahee or Lagar trip up so many people? The answer is actually a huge clue to the state's history. Here's the key. These names are like linguistic fossils. Huger, for instance, is French Huguenot. Names like Santee and Winya, those are Native American. The sounds feel so unfamiliar because they're literally echoes of all the different cultures that were here long before things got standardized. And the editor of this collection, Claude Henry Nofer, he was on a mission to preserve exactly that. He didn't see these as just words. He saw them as artifacts, clues to stories that might have been forgotten otherwise. Okay, let's move on and see how this all connects. Some of the absolute oldest names come straight from the land itself, from the rivers, the soil, even the plants. These are basically stories the landscape is telling about itself. Let's take the word Coosaw. According to the research, this is pretty much an English attempt to spell a Native American word that probably meant something like Old Creek. Simple, right? But the story of that one little word, it definitely doesn't stop there. You see, that single root, Coosaw, it just echoes all across the Low Country. It's the foundation for the Coosaw River, for Coosawhatchee, and linguists think it's probably the root for other huge river names too, like the Combahee and the Ashepoo. So one word, for one feature, ends up becoming this web of names that connects an entire region. And sometimes the story is way more specific and kind of weird. For example, in Oconee County, there's a place known simply as the Lick. So the story goes that for generations, animals and people were drawn to this one specific patch of ground to lick the soil. And it wasn't for salt. They had it analyzed, and there was none. This strange craving for this exact dirt was so well known that the place just became literally the Lick. And there it is, written right down in the journal. It's a piece of pure folklore, born right out of the earth itself, and now it's preserved in print forever. But of course, most names come from people, which brings us to our third section, how the map of South Carolina is really just a map of its people, the powerful and the powerless, the planned and the completely accidental. So, on one hand, you'll see the names of these powerful planter families, Drayden, Middleton, Pinckney, stamped on their huge landholdings. But then, on the other hand, you find names like Hope. The journal says this was a Negro community, and its name meant, the hope of a better life to come. The map holds both of those histories right next to each other. And then you get the names that come from just pure random chance. Let me tell you about a place that used to be called Equality. So the story is, the town had a sawmill, and it left these giant piles of leftover wood slabs all over the place. One day, a guy was passing through who was, let's just say, in a drunken fit, and he saw this mess and just yelled out, "This must be Slab Town." And you know what? The name stuck. And just like that, this really hopeful, aspirational name, Equality, got replaced by a nickname that some guy yelled out. That one little moment is now immortalized on the map. It's amazing.
All right, for our final section, let's pull all these threads together because when you really start to look at these names, you realize you're not just seeing words, you're seeing layers of history hiding right out in the open.
You can think of each name as a kind of fossil. It preserves a single, specific moment in time. It could be a belief, a battle, or just a really good story that people decided was worth remembering.
Check this one out. A contributor to the journal writes about a graveyard that was nicknamed No Hell. Why? Well, it belonged to the Universalist Church, and that denomination, unlike a lot of its neighbors, didn't really preach about hellfire and eternal damnation. So the nickname, it was a piece of dark, local humor about a serious theological debate.
So you can actually see the layers building up over time. You've got these ancient Native American names describing the natural world. Then, on top of that, come the colonial names honoring kings and nobles. The Revolution leaves its own scars and marks with forts and battle sites. And then, woven through all of it, you get the folk names, like Slabtown, that preserve the little stories of the people who actually lived there. So here's the bottom line. These names are so much more than just directions. They are a collective, living document. They're a map, not just of where we are, but of who we have been. And that really just leaves us with one final thought. The next time you're out and about, take a closer look at the names on the street signs, the towns, the creeks in your own area. What stories do you think are hiding there, right outside your own door?